What's up, everybody? I'm here with Josh Ramey. He's a Tomiki Aikido practitioner. I believe the only American to ever win the Worlds. Really, really successful competitor and someone I've competed against and trained with a whole bunch. I have a lot of respect for him, and also somebody that I wanted to get on the podcast from like when I was first thinking about starting this. You were one of the people that popped into my mind. I was like, oh, I got to get Josh on. Because you have a lot of experience training in Tomiki Aikido, and I wanted to kind of put the training methodology and the stuff that you've done that's worked out there and get people exposed to it. So really happy to have you here. Thanks for doing this, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So um, maybe like a good place to start is maybe you could take us through a little bit of the training that you did for the camp leading up to the worlds that you won. I
Okay.
know like Bob King Sensei had some kind of unique stuff that he ran you through, and it obviously worked really well. So I'm super curious to hear about like what you guys did.
Yeah. 2011 is when I won the internationals in London. Took first place in the men's individual. Prior to that, I think I started in 2004 in Mansfield at Bob King's gym. Bob has a interesting background compared to a lot of the Tomiki guys. He did judo down in Puerto Rico for a while. He got into some striking arts, did, early days MMA, kind of mixed it up. So he's had a very practical application of everything. He also did worked with special needs individuals for a long time. So he did a lot of restraint work, trained a lot of people. So functionality was always something that he was very into. So Randori was like a natural thing that he gravitated towards.
I feel like
2000,
that whole like Ohio crew has like there's like this corrections officer thing
so
going on there. Like I can't remember who it came from exactly, but
So Merritt Stevens, Mo Stevens' dad,
that's
taught
it.
taught all the corrections curriculum. I don't remember what years it was, but that was initially what got a lot of guys into it. He brought a lot of guys from corrections, I believe, that started training because he was in charge of, showing everybody how to restrain people effectively. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so there was a lot of that got brought into it. Um, but yeah, Bob, very similar. Obviously, with restraining people, there's a lot of you got to be careful on how you restrain people effectively and also safely to keep them,
Yeah.
the individual, safe. But 2009 was the first time we really trained for a big camp. That's when we went to Kyoto for an international. Trained here in Ohio. It was just a small group of us. There was maybe 4 or 5 people at the time training. Bob had his place at the YMCA, and then we also trained at his barn. They called it the Black Walnut Dojo. Squirrels everywhere, black walnuts all over the place. So it was maybe, I don't know, 20 by 20, maybe a little bigger, maybe a 30 by 30, but small space, always run into the walls. Um, and then there was nothing that had an elevated floor. And if you weren't careful, you'd fall off into the barn. So kind of gave some interesting dynamics. No heat in the winter, so we got that aspect of training that kind of hardened us a little bit. Floors would get hard like concrete, but that was when our main training started, I would say. Most of the training for that was repetition. A lot of what we would do was basically CrossFit style conditioning for
Yeah.
30 minutes to an hour before, pulling sleds, explosive movements, um, and then we would do an hour randori after. We would do some uh, specific training for techniques, but most of it was just playing. Uh,
Yeah.
I know some of the stuff I've been listening to you talk about with not doing specific drills over and over and over. That's my biggest thing when I've been telling people get on the mat and play. Unfortunately, it is repetition, but depends on the repetitions that you're doing. So playing
Yeah.
and finding yourself in different scenarios and situations and learning how to adapt to those versus,
Yeah.
streamline, linear, back and forth. He does this, you do that is primarily what we did.
I
Um,
think also like the perspective matters, right? Like so from what it sounds like you guys would do conditioning, right? And then you do a little bit of like drilling, but when you're doing that drilling from the perspective of, hey, I saw you do this thing in Randori and I want to make this adjustment here and see if we can fix this thing and kind of like just try it this way. And then I would imagine you weren't doing an hour of that, you were just getting a couple reps in to get that movement pattern in your body before you go back to doing live training.
Right. And then obviously you have, I've never been a big proponent of full on 100% all the time. Obviously that's good depending on the art. I mean, I feel like when you come to boxing and stuff, that becomes a different story just because of the head trauma.
Yeah.
But grappling, judo, things that you can remain safe even at 100%, it's obviously good for competition. But I feel like one of the biggest constraints we have on training with people is people are scared to fall down or accidentally get hit. So
Yeah.
when you're training 100%, I mean, you see it in jiu-jitsu too, especially with beginners, people lock up, they're not trying anything new. Nothing comes from the training other than if they find themselves in the sweet spot where, oh, now I know what to do. So you're not
Yeah.
trying new things, which is something that we were a very close knit group, so we were able to trust each other uh,
Yeah.
and train at a pace that allowed us to try new things, which puts you in completely new situations, and allows you to try things that ultimately you find out work, and then you can adapt and work on those more.
Yeah, I think sometimes there's like I think there's two things worth noting going on there. Like one, there's already an initial like constraint of you guys were pre-fatigued, right? So you did that all that conditioning beforehand. That's gonna just automatically lower the intensity, and that allows for like more, we could say, like creativity, because you're not operating, you don't have all your speed and power and explosiveness. Your muscles are tired, so you're gonna kind of like be forced to play a more technical game.
Right.
It's funny. I got criticized by my judo teacher, like the the two, like on Thursday and on this Tuesday, about like kind of just like being too strong, and like on Thursday I was like, all right, I'm gonna fix this, and then yesterday I was like, I'm gonna be like lighter and stuff, and like I must have just done a shit job of it. And he was like, no, like you're still being way too strong. He's like, your technique's never gonna develop if you just use all of your strength. And I was like, man. So one of the things I was like, you know what I need to do is like right before I go to judo, I'm just gonna hit like a ridiculous arm workout and have my arms be noodles, and then I'm like, there's no way
Right.
I can use my strength.
Did
But
you
I
do that?
also think with like close knit training groups, like when you get a really good group of people together, that there's kind of like this unique situation where everybody wants to get better, and everybody wants everybody else to get better, and you're able to sort of modulate the I wouldn't even call it the intensity, but you're willing to put yourself in situations and try new things in a way that doesn't happen in other environments. Like let's say you went to like a meetup between schools, right? And like, there's a little like the Baltimore guys got a little tension with the New York guys, and the
Right.
Ohio people got a little tension with like there's kind of like these like, little like feuds that go back to, who your dad is, and
Yeah.
who they had a feud with. Your
Right.
martial arts dad, not your literal dad. But, you know, in those environments, you don't see that. You just see people go
Hmm.
at it
Right.
because they want to win. And I think that you're not going to develop the spectrum of techniques in that kind of an environment. It's those close knit training groups where people are willing to try things, where you get a lot of development. You start to see new things emerge.
Right. No, 100%. I've spent some time in Japan training. That was before 2011 was my most time there. And at Waseda, especially, which has, one of the best Aikido programs. And they're doing 5 days a week, 3 to 4 hours a day when I was there. And that was something you saw. Obviously, Japanese are incredibly friendly, very nice, very welcoming. But when you're on the mat, that was something you would run into is when it was time for Randori or any type of training, things got turned up a little bit, and it wasn't about um, necessarily we're going to help each other get better, although that was, part of it. Um, but there's still some ego there. Like this
Yeah.
person came in from America, he's from another country. We got to show, I'm the captain. I can't let him
Yeah.
dump me. So there's a
Yeah.
little bit of competition there that may not allow us to progress or try new things. So we're both trying things, but we both knew we might play each other. So you don't want to play your hardest that they see. So yeah, the close knit group definitely allows for a much better dynamic for learning and progressing. trying new things for sure.
It's so interesting, like, because there's kind of like different strategies with, like, when I went to China for Shuaijiao Worlds, like we had these kind of like training sessions before, during, and after the tournament, and like in one of the ones, like I was at this one before the tournament, and this like older Chinese guy who was he was a cop. He asked to go with me, and my teacher beforehand had been like, he was like, look, like if they're like going with you, like don't do anything, like just like chill, because you don't want to show them what you're gonna do, and like it's not worth it. And then like we start going, and everybody whips out their phones and they're filming, and my teacher's like, he's like, beat his ass, like they're trying to embarrass you, like don't, he's like don't chill, he's like, I don't care what you show them, he's like
Yeah.
they're trying to like make this into a thing where like the old Chinese guy beats a Westerner, like
Uh,
they're like, he's like, don't relax, like they have a whole thing going on right now.
yeah,
So it's funny how that, like, there is that thing of like, sometimes there's a little bit of like ego, and it's weird because I personally don't, I'm not terribly good at just like going easy, like I kind of like am a floppy fish, or I'm going 100%. I'm not particularly good at like being like, oh, I'm gonna be like light and playful, like I try a lot of times, and it just, I end up like letting somebody do 75% of the move, and then just like completely stopping them and reversing it.
yeah,
um but so I think sometimes you have to kind of like know who you are and what your game is. Like I'm probably not going to go in there and like be able to play lightly and look like I'm any good. So I have to like kind of go a little bit harder. But it's challenging with those situations, especially when there's like a cross cultural thing. I'm curious, like what when you were in Japan, like what was that training like, and like do you feel like the stuff you did there was like 100% worth the time, or some of it was like they're like kind of like patronizing you a little bit, and then like people would pull you to the side and show you the real stuff, or like what was the dynamic like?
so the first time I was there in 2011 for training, I basically was taken under by Sato Tadayuki, which is basically the head of Shidokan, or Shishida's group. So there was a JAA. They
Yeah,
went to Shotokan with Narayama, and then Shidokan. They kind of went back to some things in the old ways. They changed a lot of the katas, looked at more of a functional. A lot of the things that Sato shows is, oh, if I'm in this position, I can't get hit. You've seen a lot of it. So he basically took me, he would take me to practices. We would do some private stuff, showed me some cool stuff, nothing mind blowing or things that I didn't have some awareness of.
yeah,
Uh, the biggest thing though was being at Waseda every day, Monday through Friday. They had, an awesome dojo there, and we would train for 3 hours. And there was tons of kids because they have it in the colleges. So
yeah,
you have a whole class of white belts. You go through your basics, and then the A team comes in later in the day. So I was doing 2 practices a day. Um, and I would be there for when Sato was teaching basically the gym classes or their PE, and get to teach a little bit. He would have me teach them one
cool.
on one, go through things, and then you have like basically all black belts come in, and then you do your thing. And they were all structured about the same. Warm ups, you would do some techniques, and basically everybody lines up on the mat. There might be 4 or 5 people, and then you all form a line and you all go. So it's constant for the full however many hours you're there. And then
Yeah,
at the end you play Randori. The captain would usually stay in on the end of the mat for the full hour. It was kind of interesting because most of the practice was pretty mild. And then I remember one practice I looked over and he's bloody and his hair's all messed up and his gi's pulled out. So they like to play. They're definitely great players that like to go with a lot of intensity. I
yeah,
think that was obviously, all those repetitions with good players obviously makes you better.
yeah,
But Sato also has who I believe was always the best in the world, even though Shimada was the one that kind of shined. I think Konaka was
yeah,
the best player. I played obviously with Shimada, and he beat my ass, dumped me multiple times. I think I underestimated him because I had played him previously in 2009, and I had actually dropped him on his head with a Yushiro, where he tightened up
yeah,
airborne and gotten a showman on him. where he had been training very, very hard. He spent some time, I had heard, at the Kodokan, got his judo black belt. And it just really refined his game and was amazing, especially against bigger guys. That was something he had planned for with
Yeah.
multiple countries having bigger guys now.
Yeah.
With no weight classes, they trained for that, and he did an amazing job.
Yeah.
Remember he threw me. I didn't feel it until I was on my back, and I was like, oh, he just threw me in the most perfect showman ever. But going back to Konaka, playing with him was a different, even though I was considering myself pretty good, having won tournaments and the level that I did, he still was just a different feel. It was almost like being a white belt in jiu-jitsu and playing with a black belt who was just rolling. You couldn't feel him. You couldn't push on him. You'd go to do something, he was gone. He was in, he was out. He's so damn smooth. And he's a bigger guy, too. I think he's under 6 foot, but he's close, very
Yeah.
strong, very fast. He's older now. He's a little older than me. So I think he's in his 40s. But at the time, he was in his 30s when I was playing with him. That was the biggest thing. He would have a practice 1 or 2 nights a week. And the biggest thing I got from him was just playing with him and watching him. That's something I was always pretty good at, was watching people, the good players, and kind of emulating what they did. Uh,
Yeah.
I've never been the most intellectual player, like breaking things down. This is what
Yeah.
but feeling things and watching people and then just doing it over and over until I got as close to that or found my own mix of what they did that was effective. So I think
Yeah.
the biggest thing was working with him, and he
Yeah.
had other players around him that were really good. That some of them I don't think had ever won a lot, or a lot of them were really good Waseda players that are now working men and they show up, but they've still got enough to play
Yeah.
that you get a lot out of it. They're still competitive on the mat. So just being around like elite players really, I think, was the biggest thing being over there.
I mean, like, just being in those training rooms where you're training with high level people, every round or most of the rounds, and doing it a lot is just that volume of training is huge.
Yeah.
I think that in most martial arts across the board, where you don't see these, it's very rare, like even in jiu-jitsu or MMA, to see like really developed pedagogy, like where coaches are like really smart and they like really have their athletes making the most out of every minute of practice. I think the best players tend to come out of spaces where they have access to other really good players and they're training with them regularly, like it the, the drilling and the all these other things, that the warming up, like the warm-ups, the drills, like, is that really making people that much better? Like, I think it's marginal. The real skill development is coming from being in the room with these really good people and sparring them, doing randori with them. And like you said, also, if you're a good student and you're paying attention, you're watching, I think that's huge too.
Yeah.
I think that's probably, honestly, I see this with all almost all my jujitsu students. Like, the one place where they really like shit the bed is they're not watching people spar. Even for me, like when I'm coaching, if watching like kids, I learn stuff. Like I'm learning stuff from like 5-year-olds. Like, I'm like, oh wait, like that thing that 5-year-old just did was like really interesting, or that was like that we were playing a game the other day where you had to get underhooks. Like, you'd start with like a 2-on-1 grip, like a Russian tie type thing, and your
Right.
job was to get some underhooks. And it was funny. Like, I for whatever reason, when I did it, I was only really thinking about front side. And this little 5-year-old kid grabs the other kid's arm and shucks him by and grabs him from the back in a back body lock. And I was like, oh yeah. I'm like, guys, like, the rider just came up with a really good thing here. Like,
Yeah.
we should be doing this from the back too. Like, underhooks from the back count as well. So
Right.
it's like, you can learn so much by watching, especially obviously high level people. When you watch really high level people, even if you don't know consciously what they're doing or what's going on, like you said, like just watching their movement and then just like kind of like trying it on. Like I always think about, like, like you're trying on clothes. Like, I'm just gonna try on this person's style of moving and
Right.
see where it lands and where it fits for me. It's not gonna be exactly the same, but there's a lot to be learned from emulating like that. It's funny when you learn painting. One of the things they have you do is like take a painting from somebody who's an accomplished painter, like a Rembrandt, and try to copy it.
Yep.
And you learn so much by doing that. I think it's the same with martial arts. What do you think
Well,
the biggest thing like you took away from training with Kanaka was?
I think a lot of it was movement and footwork. I remember Angel, when I came back, he goes, "You got to show me what you learned in Japan." And he goes, "Let me get my video camera." And he goes, "I want to see the footwork," because I definitely over exaggerate, especially when I look back. It almost looks foolish at times. But just the basically back step. I know Bob started calling it the Waseda shuffle.
Yeah.
Um, if you're shoulder width apart, you take the right foot, sweep it behind the left, and then step forward with the left.
Yep.
And it keeps your hips in place. It allows you to get new footing. It's very similar to just taking a front diagonal left step, but it gives you a different swivel of your hips, puts you in a different position, changes your body dynamics. And I remember Angel put the camera up and I did it. And he goes, "What else?" And I was like, "That's it, man. Like, that was just that
Like
over.
that's the thing.
That was it over and over and over, just in different angles." And that was something that I saw Konaka do. And they did that with their initial steps when they would do the beginning of class. That was the end of it. Um,
Yeah.
and he moved in that. I think that's what gave him uh, that smoothness about him, is the way that he was balanced at all times. He would take steps that you see his body and you're like, "Oh, he's off balance," or "He's facing that way," but his feet are manipulated in a way that he's still on balance, and he's
Yeah.
such good pressure and push back on you that he knows where you are. He knows where your pressure's coming from. It, it's kind of like a good boxer. If they roll under, they know what the next shot is, so they can move as you're throwing it or before you throw it, because they already know from experience where you're at, what's coming next, which direction you're going to move. That's going to put them in a dangerous position. So I think the footwork and movement, that's something I always try to do when we're teaching any seminars or anything, is try to get people to get engaged in movement, because not only does it do all these things that allow you um, either position or the ability to throw, but you get a little more input from the person you're playing with.
Yeah.
You even see it, any grappling art, two people just static.
Yes.
You don't open anything up until you start moving. So,
Yeah.
especially being on
No,
your feet,
100%.
if you're moving, that person has to follow you unless they're going to disengage. Starts to open things up and allows you to do, whatever comes up.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. Like when I've trained that, like now that I'm thinking about it, like I spend a lot of time just practicing the Waseda shuffle like in the air. And I'm
Yeah,
like, man, like now that I'm like just now, like now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, man, I really should have like spent more time trying to do it in Randori, like to actually like integrate it into, different throws and techniques and things like that, like I think there's a big gap to be bridged there. And if you're in like, I think when you're in the training environment that like you were in, or like the way they train, that kind of happens naturally because you spend all this time doing the movement and then you have a lot of time to do Randori. But in the West, like our training time, especially the way Tomiki Aikido is right now, our training time and our training groups are so limited, that like it's rare to you don't have that much time, right? Like we're not training twice a day for multiple hours. It's like once a week or twice a week if you're really lucky with a
right.
couple of people. So, I think if we want to raise the level in the States, that the practice time has to be more. We have to do a better job making use of the practice time for the goals that we have. And I think this is something that's complicated in Tomiki Aikido because I've seen this. I see this with Aikido as a whole, but then also with the Tomiki community is like people have really disparate goals, right? Like if you were to take everybody who's in the United States that does Tamiki Aikido, very few people really have the same goals. Like there's probably a couple of people who like really want to do Randori. Like Angel's always been huge on it. I enjoy doing Randori. I know you do, but like a lot of people want to do kata, and then you also have a whole contingent of people that are really focused on self-defense, like even Will Ball, who's in Maryland. Like when I really sit down with him and talk to him and like figure out like what he wants to do, like he really is worried about people actually attacking you with a knife.
Right.
He's and like there's nothing wrong with that. It's cool. It's something I'm interested in too. Personally, if somebody's gonna attack me with a knife, I want to have a knife myself, but
At least.
or a gun,
Yeah.
right? But I think when there's so many different goals and outcomes that people are looking for, that it becomes really challenging because you get together to train and it's like, well, I want to do Randori, and everybody else is like, well, I just want to like dissect every single move in the Daison, and I
Yeah.
think that it's like if you want to make the most out of the practice time and you want to be successful, on a higher level with the art and see it grow, there has to be some unification of the purpose behind what people are doing. You
And
know,
it's difficult to do with such a small group, a small aging group, you
yeah.
know. A lot of guys are beat up, they're older, they don't have a lot of training time. So to them, they want to get as much technical knowledge out of it as they can. When to me, the best thing you could do is play it for real, because that's always been my mind says that's my goal, is to be as good as I can at the functional application. But yeah, you've got, not enough people to separate into these groups of, okay, well, this is what we want, so we'll foster this area, versus we're going to do kata, so we'll foster that. It's, two
I also
separate.
think between kata and randori, like the original purpose of the art with Tomiki Aikido is for there to be somewhat of a balance there.
Mhm.
Like we're like, as much as I don't really love doing kata, like I'll do it.
Yeah.
I don't want to only do kata, but I'm willing to do it because I want to preserve the art as it is, and I want to say that I understand Tomiki Aikido. I can't ignore the katas.
Right.
So I think there has to be like a little bit of like good faith in like, okay, like this is how the art was designed. And I also think it's reasonable in 2025, being Americans, that yeah, like we can do some self-defense stuff too, you know what I mean? Like I'm willing to spend some time on that. um but I find that it's not necessarily true the other way, that the people who want to do kata and the people who want to do stuff aren't always willing to do the sports side. There's I think that it's like interesting too, because there's some research with the constraints led approach and the ecological dynamic stuff that shows basically when you do information style processing training, when you do drilling, when you do kata, right, that people have a sense that they've really learned something,
Hmm.
right? They have this feeling when they're finished that they've accomplished something and learned something. And then when you test them after a period of time on what they learned, they don't really remember anything.
Right.
But that when you do live training, that people tend to not feel as that they've learned as much afterwards, but that when you quiz them on it after the fact, they're like, oh no, I learned very much that if I stab with the tanto and I overextend myself and don't keep my head over my center of gravity, that I get pulled right down.
Yeah.
They have these really concrete, strong takeaways that they not just remember, but like know.
Yeah.
It's like you don't need like there's so many things when you're experienced with these with sparring, you're like I know this. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to be like, oh, like what was that? Where did I put my foot on the third
Mhm.
move of the Daison? Like where do I grab? It's not like there's no cogitation. It's just like I know not to do this thing ever again because I got dumped on my head.
That sealed that as a memory. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think that's one of the biggest. I was just talking with a student of mine, and I was like, I think this is one of the biggest challenges with live training is that people tend not to feel like they've learned as much. I
Hmm.
mean, even like what you said happened with you and Angel, right? Where you're like, he's like, "What'd you learn?" And I'm like, "You're like, I learned this thing," and you're like being genuine and like totally hyped about it. And he's like, "Come on, like you had to learn some other stuff," but like he's kind of coming at it from that like information processing standpoint, where it's like you must have learned a lot of technical details, and you're like, "No, no, no." This one thing got ingrained into me, and I
Yeah.
really think it's important.
Right. Yeah. And that wasn't even something that, obviously, other than the footwork at the end of the walks, they would do, but it was never really expounded on, other than sometimes you would see it in techniques. It was just seeing Konaka do it, feeling how it felt, and then emulating it and realizing how effective it was. And
I'm
then,
curious.
uh,
I'm curious, like if you like kind of like imaginary scenario, like if like the whole like organization in the Americas disappeared, and you were just like thrust into you were getting paid a six-figure salary, and you had millions of dollars to to spend on the program, to develop like Tomiki Aikido athletes, and your sole goal was to get people to be like competitive in on an international setting, like almost kind of like, not that Bob Jones necessarily had this much money, but I think he had a pretty good situation to grow Aikido over in the UK. Like, what would be what would the training look like if you could just, if you had enough people, and you had all the things that we don't have, and
Right.
you just wanted to grow a group of guys to go and be competitive internationally, how would you structure the training? Like, what would you make it look like?
I think it would have to be you'd have to open sport Aikido schools, which is something of hopefully at some point we'll get interested enough in and actually be able to implement. Um, but I think most people see the art from the standpoint of, like you said, a lot of kata,
Yeah.
functional. So it needs to be more, this is a sport. Because you see so many people look at it and they go, well, that doesn't work. That's not functional. It's like, well, this is a sport. There's a lot of
Yeah.
function out of it, but we're going to look at it as a sport instead of, if you learn this, you can go out and fight an MMA fighter, because that's
Yes.
not the reality. As far as the training, it would have to just, I think, be geared towards a sport. There's so many variables of why other countries have been successful and we haven't. Obviously, back in the heyday, the 90s, early 2000s, they're smaller countries. So even like the UK, if they want to get the whole squad together, their best players that are European champs, international champs, national champs, they're a train ride away. They can all get together, got the best players in the same room. We can't do that. We've got people,
Yeah.
you know, 6+ hours away from each other that have to plan an entire weekend or week to come together and train. They were also in the schools. They got kids involved. They brought a lot of them up. They became champions. They became players. I feel like once you get somebody to a certain level, enough people, they stick around. So you don't
Yep.
train consistently anymore. If there's big events or I get a chance to train, I'll still go because it's, something I've always done. Same with them. They've got champions that have been doing it their entire lives. So they're in it for life. Um, yeah, we haven't been able to get into schools and programs. And I know Bob had done some younger kids for a while at a local school. A lot of the college programs are gone away. I tried a couple years ago to get in some of the local colleges and hit some barriers that wasn't able to. But um, yeah, just being as big of a country as we are and not being in the school system is one of the big reasons.
Challenges.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, also with kids in the United States, like the so with for martial arts as a whole, and we run into this with jujitsu, is like you have these sports that are played in college, right? And
mhm,
because the fees are so high for going to college, a lot of parents from the time kids are relatively young are really aiming to get their kid athletic scholarships to school. So they're pouring resources and time and focus into those sports. So the most competent and athletic kids are always going to go into college sports with scholarships available. And martial arts is more seen as a like a something that you can send a less athletic, less interested kid. A lot of times, if they have focus or discipline issues, it's seen as like sort of like a therapeutic thing. And most of the time, if the parent reaches the outcomes they want with that therapeutic application of the martial arts, then if they see the improvement in their confidence, they see the improvement in their discipline, they see the improvement in their coordination or whatever, they'll pull them right out and have them do. It's like, all right, like we fixed the discipline issue, you can
right,
focus now go back to baseball.
right,
So I think it's really challenging to keep kids in martial arts in the States. It's not, it's not the same environment as a lot of other countries and a lot of other sports. So I think that's an added challenge. But I'm curious, like, if all these like logistical problems could be allayed, like if the organization, the had the money to just like, we're gonna do a seminar, we're gonna do training, we're just gonna fly everybody out. Like if these logistical problems weren't weren't there, like what would you, and you were the head coach, like what would the training sessions actually look like? You know, like how would you kind of like how would you have these people train?
I think it would be mostly playing.
Yeah,
I would go over uh, basic techniques depending on who you had. Um, Obviously, you have to have some bit of competency to be able to play the game and know the rules. But I think doing some situational training, which we've done over the years, and just playing at different speeds. I know you guys have talked about that with going 50% versus 100%, but
yeah,
having people on the mat to train together, that was one of the biggest constraints we've had over the years, is just not having the time together. You work out for a few hours and then people either forget it, don't learn anything, or they don't practice it once they get back. So I
yeah,
think having people on the mat, and it's not a very detailed, intricate plan, but um, within just having people on the mat and putting more time together.
yeah,
And I mean, a lot of the, I guess what I would focus more on instead of techniques, and this is something I try to do whenever I teach, is do more drills or things that look at your timing, your my or your space, positioning. Um, the more I've played, the less I focus on techniques. If I get
yeah,
I'm going to do one technique, I have to go from being at my to getting in that position, which anything can change in that matter of a half a second. So
yeah,
focus on your timing. I mean, you can, especially in Aikido, because we're not allowed to grab, sweep the leg. You can throw people without being in what even looks like a technique. I know I've
yeah,
on people before for a gate on and not even started the technique and just stepping in and getting a position where they ride the hip and fall. Same with showman. You get somebody running back far enough and they get to the end of the mat, you can dump them without hitting a good showman. So working on timing, distance, positioning, I think is the biggest factor, because if you can get those down, you can implement a technique at the very end that enables a throw.
yeah. That's one of the interesting things that I found with sumo is that because people are fighting so hard to stay in the circle,
Mm,
the feedback and their reactions become so exaggerated that sometimes you can do like you could do very strange things that wouldn't necessarily normally throw a person, but because they're giving you this exaggerated feedback in order to stay in the ring, that you know, it's much easier to get that throw. I think the Tanto, like in Tamiki's original intent, like having the knife and having people make these big committed stabs, was an attempt to do something like that, like to say, okay, I want to give you this almost like over exaggerated feedback to make doing these techniques easier. Because when you do toshu, when you do the sparring without the knife, man, it becomes so like deadlocked. You know,
right.
it's very challenging to create the movement and off balances and get people in a position where you can throw them, compared to with the tanto. Sometimes the person just stabs and it's like then you immediately send them flying.
Which became sort of an issue, because then once people realized, oh, I can score points on the stab, they became very stabilized, very disciplined with the knife. And then it kind of lost its point. Once you stab, if I don't get you right off of the stab, then we're just back to deadlock. That was
Yeah,
something that Sato, 2000, forget what year we were in Japan, that they demonstrated their Toshu. And that was primarily what they were going for, is instead of having two people in the center of the mat wrestling, they used a lot of movement. You had to
yeah,
use your atemiwaza from my. If you touched the face and you didn't tie sabaki, that was a point, and that was all based on getting more movement and not getting people just standing in the center of the ring.
yeah. I also think like I think this is a challenge with you see this in judo and you see it in Tomiki Aikido, which I mean I don't think it's a coincidence given Tomiki's background training with Jigoro Kano, but I think in the original, like their original idea is a mix of, you know, functional aspects also with certain aesthetic aspects. Like it's supposed to kind of look a certain way and
Right.
be played a certain way, and it kind of like in contrast to something like BJJ or MMA, where nobody cares how you win. Like
Mhm.
it doesn't matter. Like you could do the craziest crap in the world. If it works consistently, it'll become the meta. It doesn't.
Right.
It just doesn't matter. Like there's no adherence to a particular aesthetic. Whereas with judo and Tomiki Aikido, and I think this might also have some elements of Japanese culture kind of like in there, like that might have something to do with it. Um, there's a certain way that things are supposed to look, and there's a certain type of like technique and things that are going to be favored, and you can see this in judo that the rules of the sport are constantly changing in an attempt to maintain this aesthetic. So they have to fight really hard, like from the top down of like, okay, well, we're going to take out leg grabs and we're going to, implement these gripping rules so that people can't use unorthodox grips too much, and like do all of these things, limit newaza, and they do all these things to try to keep it looking like judo, right? And it's similar with Tomiki Aikido, is like you have to do a lot to keep it looking that way. And it ends up, on the one hand, like I get the idea, and I think that a lot of it, honestly, the onus is on players to play the sport the way it's intended versus trying to game the system. But
Right.
you also can't blame people for trying to win in a sport where there's rewards and accolades to be had for winning, right? Like, so it's very challenging because you sort of degrade the the fairness and objectivity of the sport as you implement these extensive rules as a way of maintaining an aesthetic. So like when you break down the Tamiki Aikido rules, they're actually almost impossible to referee fairly, right? Like the idea that you have to stab from a particular distance. It's like, what is that distance? Like, are we measuring it? Like, if
Very,
there's
yeah,
no way to measure that consistently between the two players, then it just becomes the whim of a referee. It's similar in judo to the newaza. Like you have to be doing something on the ground for the
right.
newaza to continue. It's like, well, what constitutes doing something? Nobody can really tell you.
Yeah.
Like I've asked like probably 10 judoka recently about this, and like nobody can tell me what constitutes doing something. It's like, oh, it just has to look like you're doing something, like, and it's like, well, you could be doing something and they just stand you up, and then two other people are not really doing anything and they don't stand them up.
Right.
So I think it's so challenging with this style of rule set for it to be like, objective and really like become like, I think for Americans, it's challenging to participate in that type of sport. Whereas like something like jujitsu is just, it's easier for us to
Yeah.
understand. It's like, oh, I choke him out, I win. I get
Yeah.
on top, I get 2 points. Like,
Well, it, you said it's similar. It's exactly the same as judo. One of the biggest things they've always gone towards with the rule changes is to not make this judo. Because how easy do we get inside, get an underhook, overhook, anything, and throw the person? The one thing that really separates us is not being able to grab the gi, which that's a shido or a penalty. But the rules have changed so dramatically over the years to
that's
make,
another funny one though, is you're not allowed to grab the gi, but you still have to wear one,
yeah,
which creates all kinds of opportunity for people to grab your gi accidentally and get penalized for it, for
yeah,
people to grab your gi intentionally and not get penalized for it.
yeah.
Like
Well, I mean,
it's,
it comes down to that, we've worn the dogi for so long. If you take it away, I know they did that for one of the nationals here, and even I didn't like it. I didn't like the way it looked. It kind of took away
yeah,
that traditional aspect. It no longer, I mean, a little more biased because I've done it for so long, so I've seen the same thing, but I didn't like how it looked. Um,
yeah,
and I think with that, like if it's not, because a lot of times you get, oh, my fingers got hooked in the sleeve and then I let go. That was unintentional. It didn't create a balance break. I didn't try to throw him. That shouldn't be a Shido. So
yeah,
that is very subjective per the ref. And I mean, the referee meetings and the player meetings are always ridiculous at the tournaments because there's a new rule set every couple years. It's always open for interpretation. And then
yeah,
it's in, a lot of times it's in, if it's from Japan, it's in Japanese, then it's translated. And what does this word mean versus that?
yeah,
It becomes quite a discussion on what's allowed and what's not. And then if all the players have one understanding, I've seen this at tournaments, we're allowed to do this, and then the head referee says, no, you're not. That might change things completely. And then not having weight classes, there have been so many rules that were changed because bigger guys like myself who could hold a knife on somebody's back, if you're under 150 pounds, you probably can't get the knife off of you. If I'm
Yeah.
hitting you and even gently putting pressure on the front. So things like that, they had to change the rules just out of necessity because people
Yeah.
were, and I admittedly, like you said, there has to be some player accountability, but I went through a period where the only thing I cared about was Randori and winning.
Yeah.
We weren't anywhere close to the top of the heap. I was like, I don't care about anything else. I just want to win. So we
Yep.
look at matches and players and rules and see what people were doing successfully. And we would take all of those things and go, all right, this is going to be our game now. All these countries have one thing they do well. We're going to do them all. And,
Yeah.
it ends up being the powers that be looking at it and going, this is too effective and takes away from what we intended the game to be. So we have to change it, which I think
Yeah.
what judo tries to do. But I guess depending on the discussion and what your end goal is, it kind of becomes a lot more convoluted than it should be. And you end up making things worse than better. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think that like when you look at both judo and Tomiki Aikido as they were like intended by the founders, that the central method isn't shiai, it isn't competition, it's randori.
mm,
And the idea was like the randori was a way to develop and like almost like live research, like to grow your skills in the art. And in that context, it's kind of like also what we were talking about at the beginning with those really good training rooms is like we're gonna get together and we're gonna train and we're gonna get on the mat. We're gonna work on what we're doing in a way that's collaborative and creative, and we're gonna actually see development and growth in the art versus right. And then the competition shiai is like an extension of that. Like we're gonna take what we worked on with our small training group and we're gonna bring it to a bigger forum and raise the intensity a little bit and put some pressure and test it and see how it works against people who don't exactly know what we're doing and we haven't exactly been training with. But then I think it gets confusing where people are like, okay, well, the goal is competition, right? When the goal becomes competition, then you see this like distortion towards gaming the system and taking all these little tricks where you can score and using those instead of trying to be like, I'm going to be the best at judo or the best at Tomiki Aikido, and I'm going to win because I'm good. And I feel like that's part of like maybe I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but maybe what set Kanaka apart a little bit is that like it wasn't like he wasn't beating you up by gaming the system. Like he was just manipulating the distance and
yep.
timing, and you would go to grab him and he wasn't there. Like it was the real skill of the art just kind of shining through all those other things.
I think he did have probably one of the more pure. He never did anything that was like sketchy or did something in a way that was like, oh, that was kind of shady, or there was never any nasty tricks. He was about as pure of a player as you can be, and it was all from his skill set. Um, you play in tournaments all the time where people do things, and you're like, oh, that's a dirty trick. But it makes me wonder too if you're simply going from the perspective of being a pure. There's not a lot of konakas, so
Yeah.
it makes me wonder how far things. I mean, you see with jujitsu, like the crazy stuff people are doing versus 20 years ago. If it was
Yeah.
just to make the art better and not have a winner in a competition, would we push the envelope as far, or would we bump up against a wall that says, well, that goes against what naturally we were intending to do? So we're not
Yeah.
going to versus going too far and having to pull it back. I guess it depends on the art and how far you go and what tangent you go off in as far as what you're
Yeah,
intending to do.
I kind of think of it like almost like an ecosystem, and that like there's going to be people who game the system, and there's going to be people who pursue the real skill of the art, and that you have to just let it play out. Like sometimes an invasive species, which are like the system gamers, they get into the ecosystem and they take over, but that's eventually going to give way to people who figure out how to use the actual skills that are intended in the art to beat those
Yeah.
people. And there's going to be kind of this like movement through that stuff. And I
Mm.
honestly think that a lot of times the interventions from the top down of trying to fix it with rules sometimes can be helpful, but in most cases, they're actually just interrupting the process. And if you let the process play out, that eventually the people who have the real skills will figure out a way to beat the people who are gaming the system. You know, it just might take time, which people are never okay with. They want it to stay looking a certain way, you know. But if you look at all of these arts, like there's nothing new. Like stuff just I just posted a video showing like using like wakigatame, like Mayatoshi type stuff to break gi grips. And you know, I was like, oh, this is from Shuaijiao, this is different, this isn't Aikido, but it's the same thing. And then somebody sent me a video of O Sensei doing the exact thing. Like exactly the same as what I was doing. Like I'm like, are you kidding me?
That's always my favorite because I did kickboxing for a long time after Tomiki Aikido primarily, and that was always my favorite thing is working with a Taekwondo guy or a Muay Thai guy or an American kickboxer, and they all share the same thing. And they go, "Well, in this system, we do." It's like you know you're doing the same shit that the other guys doing. You're just calling it something different. Like
Yes.
your body can only move in so many different ways, man.
You're like, that is a roundhouse kick, sir.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't call it. That's what it is. Yeah, same exact thing. Yeah.
Just since we're like kind of running out of time here, I have one more question for you. Maybe you could just give like just like one or two like drills or like little games or something you think would be useful for players to do. And it could be, honestly, it could be something that you think would be good for Tomiki Aikido players, or just something you think is good for Tomiki Aikido, from Tomiki Aikido for other arts. But I know you mentioned there were some little like things, specific trainings you would do during your training with Bob King Sensei. It could be one of those, but maybe you could just share one or two of those with everybody. I think people would be interested in that.
One of the bigger things we did would we would just do movement drills, and instead of in like a basic pattern, one person would put the back of their hands on the other person's chest, and you would just do movement. I think it's one of the big things becoming becomes a problem with stand-up arts. I feel like to get to a certain level, there has to be some bit of athleticism, and a lot of people aren't able to get past sometimes their genetic ceiling. But I feel like if you do certain drills, you can adapt enough or become more athletic in the confines of the game or whatever physical activity you're doing. And just, some people can barely walk. And then we're asking them to do complicated moves on their feet and not fall over. So I think keeping your balance while you're moving was something that worked really well. Learning not to fall down. So what we would do is movements. You'd first go forward and back. Basically, you try to keep the back of your hands on the person. They move backwards, then they move towards you, and you try to keep the same pressure so that you're keeping a similar distance. They can't crash it. They don't want to get away from you. So you always want to keep the back of your hands on them. Then you move side to side, and then you go free play, and you go anywhere you want to go.
You're
But
kind of just trying to stick to them. It's almost like kind of like a sticking game.
yeah, exactly. Which I know, plenty of people do in different arts. We do it with an outstretched arm.
Yeah, no, I really like doing that with foot sweeps. Like I've been playing this game where I have like a wizard and the other person has an underhook, and I just will try to stick my foot to their foot as long as I can. Like just keep touching them with my foot in any way possible. And it's
Right.
crazy because I won't even be trying to take the person down, but I end up like just like it just emerges out of it. So that's a great one.
Sometimes people almost throw themselves. Uh,
Yes.
you keep this somewhat of a position within, a few inches or so. They get into a position where you apply a little bit of pressure less than you would have had to, and they fall down. So, yeah. And then it keeps you from, if you're the person moving, um, you learn how to stay on your feet, better balance. That was always a good one I thought that we used, especially when you get somebody who's more aggressive coming towards you and you have to tie sabaki or get away. And it teaches you how to like pressure in and then back off and get that separation that you might know, even boxing if you're in the clinch. So,
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like being able to stick with them. That's a great one.
yeah.
That's really cool.
Another one we did, and we try to do it occasionally. I like to show it a lot because once you get good at it, it's easy. And you move around in the same way. So they'll try sumiatosh, kotegaish, position yourself so that you don't get thrown, but you're totally relaxed the whole time. Um, it's a good way to feel other people's movement, where you're in danger, where you're not, versus a lot of people feel, oh, I'm in danger, and they may freak out or overextend, and then they're thrown, versus realizing how small and incremental it is where you're safe versus you're not, and then where your balance points is, where theirs are. I think that was always the biggest thing, is being able to feel somebody else. So having a connection to somebody and find out how minimal of a connection you can get to somebody and still feel where they're at, where their balance point is, where yours is, and then, being able to implement that in the game.
Can you just describe it one more time? You cut out for 1 second, and I missed the beginning of the drill.
Oh, you broke up. What'd you say? Oh, so essentially having somebody have a 2-on-1, so an outside 2-on-1,
Got
and
it.
they're manipulate you in any way that they can to even just get an off balance. If you can get a throw, cool. And then the other person's whole point of the game is to not be thrown or not lose their balance. And then
Without trying to disengage from the 2-on-1, or
you let them have the arm. So you extend
got
your
it.
arm, and typically I'll start with my arm extended and kind of in a knees bent position. And then you also learn little things like, I'm not standing with an outstretched arm that's completely limp and disconnected from my body. I've got pressure through my arm, through my elbow into them. So if they try to come in, I can deflect a little bit through my elbow or through my shoulder, depending on
Yeah.
my hand. And it doesn't have to be this big push. It can just be a slight deflection
Yep.
and take them completely off course. But just really having that connection and being able to feel how you can off balance people or keep yourself on balance based on their pressure. It's always stuff that I've learned through feeling and playing. That's why I'm so big into people doing it. And it's always been difficult for me. I feel like you'd be better to do it if we discussed it more, but to articulate it to people is
Yeah.
difficult. A lot of times I'll explain some of this stuff and people just go, I don't understand what you're doing.
Yeah. 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 I mean,
It's
that I have that challenge too with some of this. I mean, it's funny from my perspective, just because I tend to be kind of like open minded. I'm just like, before I poo poo something, like I'm just gonna try it. Like, let me just try it. And with these things, when I try them, I'm like, oh, this is really valuable. I think there's something cool about that particular drill where the idea of like you leaving your arm in. I think this is important because the tendency as you go from randori to shiai, like from just sparring to competition, is that we always kind of like rip out of bad positions. But a lot of the opportunities and affordances you're going to get against a skilled player are sort of in the hot seat, so to speak. So I
right.
think a lot of value of like learning to stay in that hot seat of they're controlling my arm and get comfortable there, because I think you could even progress that drill and then say, okay, now the person has to stay in the 2-on-1, but you're allowed to counter,
Right.
right? Because there's so much to be gained there from a defensive standpoint of learning to handle the person controlling your arm without getting thrown. But
Yeah.
then also you have opportunities to counter because you have connection to them. So
Well,
it's
that,
like a lot of these sports, grappling, Tomiki Aikido, all these different sports is about how do we take connection and manipulate the other person's body. And most of the time, against a skilled opponent, you're not necessarily going to be able to just have the connection that you want. A lot of the people who are really the best at this stuff are able to capitalize on the other person's connection. So I think there's a lot of cool stuff in that, and that's a really valuable one. So thanks for sharing that. This has
yeah.
been great, man. I really appreciate you doing this. I know it's hard. We both got little babies to
That's why I'm out in the car. I got one sleeping and a 6-year-old running around like a mad woman.
well, I super appreciate you taking the time to do this. I really wanted to get some Tomiki Aikido guys on the podcast. I'm hoping to get Bob Jones and Eddie Walput too. So,
Be very
um,
interesting. Yeah, you should do that. I'm sure they'd be
yeah, I think Eddie and both of his kids are actually going to do it together. So I'm looking forward to doing that one.
Ita and Tim.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited for that one. So thanks for doing this, man. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I'm sure we both have to run back to our babies.
Well, man, thanks so much. I appreciate it.